Welcome to the Australian Property Investment Podcast with your host, Aaron-Christie David. Each episode, we ask an expert to share their key insights for aspiring investors to make confident property choices.
G'day everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Australian Property Investment Podcast. Joining me on the episode today, we've got Luke Moroney from Search Party Property. Welcome.
Thanks for having me on.
Mate, it's an absolute pleasure. For those that know of buyer's agents, know that Luke has a wonderful reputation. And so what we want to do today, Luke, is we deal with a lot of people that are starting out on their property journey. A lot of people that, when they're taking that first step to become investors, rightly, there's some fears that maybe hold them back. So we want to go through that together. The reason why I've brought you on is not only have you lived and breathed this personally, building your own property portfolio, you do this daily for your clients as well. So we want to kind of pick your brain and go, look, if I'm a newbie coming into this, what do I need to know? What are my blind spots as well? And also when your trained eye is looking for properties, for example, what are you going to look at? So there's some of the questions that we want to get through today. And really hear about your story, because I know you've got a great story when it comes to property and how you've gone on your journey as well. So we'll definitely go down that path as well. But Luke, do you want to kind of give us a quick background story as to how Search Party Properties kind of had its roots and where it's gone to from inception, mate?
Yeah, well, I guess my personal journey takes me back 20 years. And, I didn't really know what my true passion was when I was growing up and coming out of school. And
none of us do, mate.
No. But finally, real estate really resonated with me, and I was growing my property portfolio, and I was just so enthused to help other people. I started out personally as a property coach, where I was helping other people and then having buyer's agents source out properties for me. And then got to—
That would have been fairly a new proposition when you were starting, because buyer's agents, I feel like planners have been around for a while, brokers were there, and now buyer's agents feel like they're kind of the new kids on the block, isn't it?
Yeah. Look, I've been working with, in the property space with people for about the last 7 or 8 years.
Yeah.
So yes, that was fairly new, but I think some of the buyer's agents out there that have been working 20 years, right? Yeah. And they're just foreign to everyone. Like, why pay someone else to source out a property for you? But we know the results that it's gained for investors, for owner occupiers when it comes to having someone help them on the journey of buying investment properties.
Yeah.
So the Search Party Property team have been in place for 3 years now. We've worked with many clients building their property portfolios, and not only just one property in their portfolio, but multiple properties.
Yeah.
And that's where you start to see the massive results come through in developing that wealth creation strategy.
I guess that's the beauty of where our businesses have gone to, is that we get to see kind of year-on-year growth. We do annual reviews, for example, where you track their portfolios. But kind of cast your mind back to a lot of the clients when you worked around with them the first time, and when you still work with first-timers, for example. What's some of the common questions that come up from your perspective? Because I know from ours, they get hung up on, should I be going interstate versus buying in an area that I know? Should it be a house or a unit, for example? So take us through some of the questions that you typically get for a first-time investor.
Yeah, definitely in terms of the interstate. And I think most people buy an investment property within about, I think the figures are, and I know a research company did something on this recently, where it's like 60% of investors purchase within 50 Ks of where they live.
Yeah.
So
there's something about, I don't know, I read the same report. I think it was a couple of researchers out of University of Sydney that came up with it. And I think the numbers almost like what you said, just tad over 60%. It's alarming when you talk about how big Australia is, but they buy properties close to home.
It's the comfort side of it. You've got to think about, I guess, the fears and uncertainties when it comes to investing. It was like, well, at least I can go to that property. But I don't attend any of my properties that I invest in or as a landlord. And, that's why we've got property managers, but that's why we've got the team of experts around us. So I guess the big things or big fears for individual investors when they're first starting out is thinking about the debt and the risk involved.
Yeah.
Thinking about, is a tenant going to damage my property? Is the interest rates going to go up? There's just so many perspectives of things could potentially go wrong, but that's like in life, right?
Absolutely. It's any part of life. We call it the locus of control, right? So what can you actually control? So let's break that down. So you go rising interest rates, out of our control. Tenant does damage to the property, somewhat out of our control. Maybe a good property manager can filter out some unlikely candidates perhaps, but then there's insurance for that.
That's right.
Yep. What are some of the other ones? Land taxes, out of our control. cash flow. Maybe we can control the rent that we ask for, but again, that comes down to the nature of the property
and market rent. What's the market saying at the time? So, I think there's a fairly good factors that you can control, like you're saying, and I think that is about minimizing the risk as much as possible, and that's what we do as property strategists, as the buyers agents, as coaching people through the investment journey as well. Like we're there at the start with the strategy and plan. We're there during the buying process and looking at the individual property deals, and then we're there afterwards and, ongoing if there is changes in market rents, if there is issues with tenants, if there is, potential changes in interest rates, how can you mitigate that risk? How can you respond or be resilient at times when there is that roller coaster ride?
You've just touched on something there about the property strategy plan. I think you termed it as well. So quite often I'll deal with some investors and they've bought a property and then kind of reverse engineer on the strategy going, I bought it. It's in a good growth corridor. I think the cash flow is okay. I think. And I'm like, well, what did you do and why did you do it? And it sounds a bit counter-cyclical to ask that after they've bought a property, but I guess that's your role as the coach, as the buyer's agent to go, this is the strategy that we're going to set, and therefore we'll look for a property that fits that ticks all the boxes. So take us through your methodology, or take us through that, I guess, that property strategy.
I think it all starts out with the individual. So what do they want? What do they need? What kind of risks do they have? What is their appetite? Are they going to get overwhelmed in certain situations? Are they going to be there with property as a passion, and they're going to spend more time with it? So we've just got to take a real good focus on the individual and what they require. Then it goes into thinking about what strategy is attached to that. So is it a property of high cash flow? Is it a property that we're going to renovate, subdivide, granny flat potential on that? Is it something that they're kind of land banking a property for the future? So right now they're not really, land banking will probably see lower cash flows, but really good potential for capital growth if the property's picked right.
Yeah.
And but they might in 5 years' time or 10 years' time want to have the movement away from their own job or their own business into doing more in property.
Yeah. Okay.
So that can, you're kind of working on a strategy to develop a property portfolio for the future for them, when they're actually going to have the time, the inclination to actually do that renovation or do that subdivision or do that granny flat.
Do they? I mean, here's the thing with life, right? Like you have these great plans and it gets to it. And I think when I deal with first-time investors, sometimes they've got the drive, that they've got the ambition to get, but they don't have the means. Like they may not have the borrowing capacity. They may not have the deposit, for example. So they're hungry, but they don't have the means. And they get to like the more experienced and more seasoned to mature investors. They've built their portfolio. Now they've got the means, but sometimes their risk takes them down a notch where they go, it's actually too much to lose now as well. And I just want to kind of see from your perspective, how do you then break through that for someone going, hey, mate, you've got a huge amount of equity. You've got an immense amount of borrowing capacity. This is a less risky move, but it's not as risky as not doing anything, for example.
Well, I think about it like with anything in life, and I guess especially in property where there's a lot at stake. There's high debt, and you're highly leveraged into property, which the lenders allow because they feel like it's a safe bet in terms, or fairly safe bet in terms of investment wise. And it goes back to what kind of mindset do you have? So is it a case that you're lacking something where you are at that moment in time? What are the fears? What are the uncertainty? What are the pressures on yourself personally? So maybe it's not even about property. It's about something else going on in your life. So it kind of goes back to a coaching space. And I think this is the strong part of, my makeup and my DNA in terms and my learnings and experience is to go through all that journey and say, what is the ongoing work we need to do for ourselves personally to get ourselves in a perspective of we can take on more of that risk, or we need to do something in various areas, or we need to spend more time on those areas, or we need to be coached in some of those areas to say, okay, is this right for me? Because if we speak to investors when they're first starting up and there is a chase for just money and the hunger for money rather than trying to develop a property portfolio for the long term and have that patience, well, there might be something missing, because in a year or 2 years' time, you'll feel some pressure because you haven't got that money come through that quickly. So then you put you put mindset pressure and stress on yourself to actually make things happen. And then you push that investment to try and deliver the goods. And then you come to a point that you've actually put so much pressure on it that you might even lose money out of it because you haven't worked on what is the actual strategy of it and follow that strategy and not chase the money.
Yeah.
And I think that's a big part of, working on that mindset for now and into the future. So if you are in like 5 years or 10 years time wanting to do something a little bit different, or you change your mindset, maybe it's just a rework of what's going on for you at that time. So it might be something outside where it might be family or business or employment pressures that might mean that the property portfolio sits in the background for that period of time.
Yeah, right. Yeah, nice one. The mindset of the investors, something that probably flies under the radar. We talk about borrowing capacity, we talk about risk appetite, but quite often it's maybe the influences that they've got. It's their own personal risk. It's their own ability to sleep at night with the debt that they've got that can kind of govern.
Well, I think it's 80% of what we do is mindset, and 20% is the knowledge, skills, and experience. Yeah, awesome. Right? Like what kind of, with all that fear and uncertainty we talk about first-time investors, most people don't even do it.
Yeah.
Right. So we're in a perspective of going, well, if you work on that mindset, that 80% of it, maybe you go in and take action. If I didn't take action on my first property, I wouldn't be where I am today in having a property portfolio, a large property portfolio.
Yeah. So
even though it wasn't the greatest decision at that time, I learned a lot from it.
Yeah, right.
But the action is a big part of it, because in Australia, there's only 20,000 people that have 6 or more investment properties. So for me, like, why isn't there more than that?
Absolutely. And I think we talk about they're almost the top 1% of property investors will get to 6 or more.
It's even less than that.
Absolutely.
It's less than 1%. Yeah.
You're right. You just mentioned there about your own journey. Can we just kind of go there for a little bit and say, look, take us through it? I mean, you mentioned you bought that quite a few years ago. You're starting out, for example, how did you get into the market? And then your subsequent purchases on, like, how did you end up growing a successful portfolio for yourself?
I was really green, really naive, no knowledge, no skills, no experience when it came to property in my first purchase. And I did what most people did, bought close. Yeah. Exactly. And it was about 10 Ks from where I lived. It was in Western Sydney. I bought at the peak of the market back in 2002.
Right.
That property didn't really grow for the next 10 years or so. So the market around Sydney remained pretty stable. There was up and downs through that journey. And I know a lot of people that in 2005 and 6 and 7 that sold property at a less amount than what they bought it for. And from 2012, then the boom started into 2017, where it sort of started to peter off a little bit at that stage. But for me, it was just buy it, hold it for 50 years. That was my strategy.
Yeah, nice.
So it didn't matter. Like, okay, I put down the deposit, had a tenant in there. Look, I made mistakes on trying to manage that tenant on my own as well. Plenty of problems. Massive rookie error. And there was plenty of rookie errors in it. Like, obviously, in terms of buying that property in that area at that time, it was actually negatively geared.
Right.
In that,
if you don't mind me asking, like, freestanding unit,
freestanding house, 3-bedroom, out in the suburbs. It's in Blacktown in Western Sydney. So a large area, it's got train stations, schools, highway access, a lot of great things in terms of infrastructure, but it had just grown by about 50, 60% in the last preceding 4 years.
Yeah, right.
So buying at the peak of that market, then I took on a lot of risk. Right. And then on the back of that, I tried to manage tenants on my own, holes in the walls, tenants leaving without paying. I actually rocked up one time and knocked on the door several times, didn't hear any sounds, opened the front door and no one was in there. And there was just mess and rubbish and all sorts of things. So that happened on a couple of occasions for when I first started.
And you talk about mindset, right? To the lesser thick-skinned investor, they would have gone, that's it. Pulling up stumps, I'm going to sell the property, offload the problem, and just buy my own home, for example. Yep.
Absolutely. And I saw that, through, like I said, 05, 06, 07, where people sold for less than what they paid for it. And I would have taken a massive hit on that. Would have been $50,000, $100,000 potentially, especially if I didn't clean it up.
Yeah.
And then, having the patience, having that long-term strategy, at least in my defense, in one good thing is I wanted to hold it for 50 years.
Yeah.
And I know property will always grow in terms of capital cities around Australia. It's tried and tested.
Yeah.
It grows, right? If I have that mindset and I have that patience, it'll grow.
Nice. So you have a property that doesn't really do much for quite a number of years. How do you then go for the next one after that? Because often the piggyback is draw the equity out to then go again. But if you don't have that growth, you can't have that option unless you're paying the loan down, for example.
Well, it was actually 9 years before I bought my next one.
Wow.
So there wasn't even a thought process. I was like, buy one and
Yeah.
hold it for the rest of my life and then work all my life.
Yeah.
But speaking to people over that 9 years about investment strategy, about business, about various wealth creation strategies that were going on, I was like, okay, I need to do this differently. So I attended more seminars, connected with more people. I was always found myself talking to people about property or investment and just looking at all different types of strategies out there.
Yeah.
Property kept resonating with me. So I continued on the property path. So I bought the next one. I actually bought it back in Blacktown.
Yeah, right.
So I went back to the same market that I failed on.
Yeah.
But I could see where I went wrong. And now that the market was starting to move in Blacktown. So there was a lot of people that were looking at buying houses that have granny flat potential in Blacktown. Right. So there was a lot of competition in 2012 with that market.
Yeah.
But I actually found myself into buying another property that had granny flat potential, but actually had a swimming pool. So it was more cost to do that.
Yeah, right.
But I thought if I buy that property without any competition, I could actually buy it for lesser value without anyone else bidding against me. So I went to this one property, went to the auction, and I was the only one that turned up at the auction.
Which would be a rarity in today's market, right?
Massive.
Anyway,
yeah. And even back then in Blacktown, the market was moving. And it was probably one of the first markets to move in terms of the start of the growth in 2012.
Right.
So being at that auction and having that property, or basically being able to bid and seeing the reserve price up front, then I can negotiate with the owners directly on that deal. Yeah. Got a good price.
Well done. And then your momentum to kind of keep building after that, like how's that journey?
Yeah.
And there's probably things that have gone wrong. So for everything that's gone right, what are kind of some of the lessons you've learned, or some of the setbacks you've even had?
Well, I think the big one for me in terms of learning through that experience. So obviously using a property manager was a big one for me at the start, and looking at markets and how markets work was another big one. And I think the biggest one, or the overarching one, is about the team. The team of people around you. Obviously, we work as a buyer's agent. I've used buyer's agents before. Yeah. I've used other people to source out property. I've looked at research data that's been collated by people who are doing it each and every day.
Yeah.
So you need to get to using people that do things each and every day.
Yeah, nice.
What is their experiences? What's been their results on what they've done? And if they can, justify that and they really resonate with you, then start using those team members, because if I used a buyer's agent when I first started, I probably would have seen, in that 10 years of my first, with the growth of my first property, or the no growth of my first property, I would have had maybe 5 or 6 properties instead of just one.
The irony is that the first time investor needs the buyer's agent probably more than like the third or fourth buyer, but the first time investor sometimes can't afford it. And I'm like, it's almost like you cannot not afford to engage a buyer's agent. It's almost like an insurance to make sure that you buy well, isn't it? That first property, I call it the cornerstone property, which is you buy this, it's going to grow in value, it's going to grow, you're going to get the confidence, then go again. So the buyer's agent's fee is almost a very small price to pay to get you a really strong result for that first investment property.
Yeah, absolutely right. It is an insurance policy. Look, like I said, my first property, there was no growth for 10 years. Like if I even had $100,000 or $200,000 in growth, that would have meant one property at least.
You would pay, buyer's agent's fees somewhere between 10, 15,000, 20,000, right, for example. You would pay that to get that type of growth, wouldn't you?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is what we're seeing in the market right now.
Yeah.
We had a client buy in October or November last year, and they bought a property for $470,000. We're seeing comparables only, 6-8 months later that are 10-15% more than that. So having a property being sold with exactly the same, just a few streets away for $530,000, they've made $60,000 within, 6-8 months. So some really good growth in the market if you're looking at the right strategy for you in a growing market.
Nice. Anyone listening will probably go, well, how did you pick that street, for example, or that property compared to the other ones that haven't done so well, for example? So you mentioned research, for example. You've looked at thousands of properties, for example. How are you then going, this is the property for someone? Yes, it's a property strategy, but how are you eliminating other properties to get to the one that you end up trying to negotiate for a client, for example?
Yeah, it comes down from all the way to macro, right? Yep. Thinking about what's happening in the Australian market, deep diving into that, which I think in terms of what we look at is low risk, good cash flow, good potential for growth. Because most of our clients are going to rely on that cash flow, are going to rely on that capital growth to keep building that property portfolio. The low risk is the combination of what the cash flow is going to be on the property and what the potential growth is going to be in the property.
Yeah.
And, if it's in areas that are low vacancy rates that, you'll be able to get a tenant on. So a lot of combinations in that in terms of the individual deal, but going from like macro, in terms of picking a capital city or an area or region that is going to work well for the future, and then looking at the individual deal. So you can pick a suburb or an area that's going to work, but it's more so about getting the individual deal right. Even if you think about the city market back between 2012 and 2017, pretty much every suburb grew by 50, 60%. But if you got a really good deal during that time, you would have done 70 or 80%. And it may have been doing a really good deal in whichever suburb of Sydney. So I think it's more about the deal and picking the macro side of things and the research where there is going to be capital growth, then kind of figuring out what kind of suburb is going to work best over the other one.
So, it goes to that one of those sayings that you make your money when you buy well, right? So you're saying it's all in the deal. So what is your secret sauce, for example? Say I'm a DIY investor. I'm like, I want to do it myself.
Absolutely.
They're out there, versus delegate to a buyer's agent, engage a buyer's agent, for example. What gives you... Is it the fact that you court a buyer's agent gives you that bargaining power? Is it the fact that you know how to work a deal? Like, what is that secret sauce that you have compared to going to a DIY investor that says, I'll do it myself?
Yeah, there's some of those reasons that you just explained. So for us, in terms of being a buyer's agent, I guess the overall influence of that on an agent is that we have multiple people coming through.
Right.
So for them, and they also feel the safety and security of getting the deal done as opposed to an individual investor or an owner-occupier.
So you mean this deal's going to go through as opposed to someone that's coming off the street going, I can't really vouch for them to get this one over the line, whereas they come to you, they're probably pre-approved, they're ready to go, the brief has been met. That's
absolutely right. And, there's so many deals that actually fall through. So they would rather get the deal, like agents and sellers would rather get the deal done than have to go through the process again. Yeah, so sometimes we're waiting for finance for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks into the deal. If that finance falls over, they have to start day one, and that's another 30 days, 40 days.
Spot on.
And they might be campaigning for another 2 or 3 or 4 weeks before they get another deal. So
it's also the reputation that gets, this is what I tell clients. You don't know that the finance fell through. You think there's something wrong with the property. So if the property goes back onto the market, the first instinct is there's something wrong with the property, as opposed to not knowing that the finance fell through. They might have been self-employed. The bank might have said, no, it's undisclosed debt, whatever it was. I mean, we're closer to it, but it's exactly to that point going, everyone's reaction is there's something wrong with the property. And then the agent has a bigger issue on their hands going, No. There's something wrong with the finance as opposed to something wrong with the property, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. And I guess, looking at it from a buyer's agent's perspective, yes, we do have a stronger buying power being and doing what we do. But I think if you're an individual investor and if you have the time, the inclination and the energy to get out there and do deals, then you can. You've just got to get time in the market. It's like anything, to learn how to do anything. If you put 10,000 hours in, you can be successful. And it's us. We're on the ground each and every day looking at deals.
Yeah.
We're speaking to agents on a constant basis. We're speaking to sellers on a constant basis. We're speaking to buyers. What do they need? What are their concerns? So for us, we're going to be a step ahead of that individual investor or the individual owner occupier. But if you want to go and do it yourself, which I've done previously, and I know on my second property in Blacktown where I went 8 weeks, week after week after week, going in to inspect properties, meeting the same agents, and they're like, Luke, you again. And that's why you're building that rapport. And it's like, I'm looking for this, I'm doing this. You're You're nice to the agents. You're respectful of their time. You're helping them out. It's all that building rapport things with the agency, actually get a deal done. You're very clear about what you want. You've got your finance ready. Be a good customer. Help them as well as they can help you.
Mate, this is what I love, because this is what we try to tell our clients, which is the agent is not the enemy. The agent is the conduit to buy the property that you want. So get them on your side, as opposed to, don't be cagey with the details. Tell them you're organized. But I think the old way of buying property was be skeptical or be wary, play your cards close to your chest, for example. But you're saying almost do the exact opposite. It's be open and be easy to do business with.
I think it's a bit of both. So I would be very clear about what you want.
Yeah.
I would be, you can still be a little bit cagey on price and how things work.
Yeah.
But you don't have to tell them exactly what kind of price point, but especially if you're an investor, whether you buy at $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 may not matter to you.
Yeah.
It's getting the right deal, right? So, it's like, I'm looking for the right deal opportunity that's going to suit me on a low risk, as an example, like of what we do, low risk, good cash flow, good potential growth. So if I find that deal, then I'll buy it.
Yeah.
So yes, I've got a pre-approval for 600,000, but I might buy for 400 or 500, depending on the deal.
Yeah.
But so I think it's the words that you do use. And this actually came up for me yesterday in terms of looking at market rents. So we had a buyer that has, gone through a lease period, and they had to convey a message to the property manager that then conveys over to the tenant, right? Yeah. So it's about putting the best words forward so that they're working on your behalf and not the tenant's behalf of, saying I'm not going to increase rent, but in actual fact, you're $40 or $50 below market rent right now, and you could increase your rent, and it's still justifying it to the tenants that they are still below what the market rent is. Yeah, nice. So it's really how you give the warning to those people, whether it's a sales agent or the property managers through that journey. So it's a negotiation piece, and it goes back to the experience I guess we have in what we're doing with negotiations with agents, and being very clear because we've done multiple deals with some of these agents that we can actually work with them to get a deal across the line.
I call you guys an unfair advantage. I say, guys, girls, buyers, agents, it is an unfair advantage to get access to properties that pre-market, off-market, during market, to try and, if it's access properties, if it's settlements, for example, you can negotiate. Buyers, agents become an unfair advantage as well.
Well, how often do you see on the online portals in terms of properties for sale where it's like contract crashed or finance affected property, or back on the market? You might see that sort of wording that comes up. But we'll probably know about it, potentially if it's a good enough deal that's going to work for our clients before it actually changes over. Yeah, so nice. That could be something that actually gets put on the market that way, or we might find out about it first of all.
Wonderful. Wrapping up, I mean, for you, bit of wisdom or bit of thoughts that you may have for the first time investor, what would be your little bit of advice for, I'm looking to buy my first property? What would be your guidance for a first time investor, do you think?
Team is the big one.
Yeah.
So you need the team of experts around you.
And when you say team, we're talking
mortgage broker, buyer's agent, solicitor, pest and building. But one of those team members could be an integral part of collating the whole team together as well.
Yeah.
So who's your first point of contact? What kind of experience do they have? What's happening with their own portfolio? So that could be a big one in terms of asking those questions about selecting the right team of people that are going to help you. What kind of words resonate with you of what they're saying? Yeah, nice. So that's building the team. I would say don't be scared to go interstate when you're looking at investing. A big one for us right now is we are buying a lot of properties for most of our clients up in the Queensland market.
Yeah.
There's 30,000 people that moved net migration into Queensland last year. So it's a big one in terms of one aspect of why property is growing in Queensland right now, and rents are growing as well. So, think about what is it really about that property being close to where you live, or are you actually ever going to inspect it? Are you going to actually go and, fix the toilet or fix the washer on the taps and things like that? Yeah. I wouldn't. I'm like, my time is more valuable somewhere else. So
they stay in your lane. You go, well, that's what a property manager does. And I find a lot of good investors go to their property manager and go, look, if it's under $200, I just trust you to go and fix it. Make sure the tenant's happy. And I think that's the other part that I see is underrated with investors is happy tenants as well, less turnover. They're going to take care of the property. If you increase the rent, for example, they're not going to push back, for example. So being a good landlord and a good investor is kind of something that maybe flies on the radar a little bit as well, isn't it?
I kind of think about it in terms of managing your team. So you as an investor, your role is to manage your team. So the big part of it past the sale process is the managing the property manager.
Yeah, nice.
So if, you may not have to do too much if they're great tenants and everything's, seemingly well, but check in with your property managers. Yeah. And if it, tough times or there's tenant issues or there's repairs and maintenance issues, you really need to get on the phone on a constant basis and chase up your property managers.
Nice. People
don't chase.
Yeah.
And then you've got to come across it with a really good mindset around it. Be subtle when you're chasing. Don't be in a position to aggravate your property manager. That you've got to be they're you're the client for them. So be there to help them and assist them through your property.
Yeah.
Like you might be thinking of you paying them a fee. And they're working for you, but I feel like it's the other way around.
Nice.
Yeah.
And they've also got another stakeholder, which is the tenants.
That's
right.
So
the property managers they've got the landlord and they've got the tenant, and they're trying to manage both. But yeah, the landlord's paying them, but you need happy tenants as well. So that property manager, I feel, is one of the ones that probably flies on the radar a little bit as the team member that you got to kind of keep on side and keep engaged as well, isn't it?
Yeah, look after your property manager.
Nice one.
And just be on top of them along the way as well.
Excellent. Hey, look, thank you so much, mate. Really appreciate your time, your insights as well. If you do want to reach out and have a chat with Luke from Search Party Property, his details will be in the links below. I really hope you found this episode of the Australian Property Investment Podcast helpful. Luke, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Aaron.
Appreciate it.
Cheers.